Hello and welcome. My name is Matt Petrowski. We are going to be learning about FileMaker today. This is video 3. I'm going to look over here and turn down my music here as it slowly winds down. Welcome to this video. My guess is that you're interested in learning more about FileMaker. This is video number 3 in a series that I'm doing from the ground up talking about FileMaker. And today's topic in particular is, I've been mentioning in video 1 and video 2, we've been working up to the major areas where you work with FileMaker and define the whole of your solution. And that's within the manage area, within the define database. Now we're going to be taking a look at that, but one of the benefits of me doing this live, this is being recorded live. If you're watching this after the fact and you have questions, you can always post them into the comments down below, or you can send them in. Let me show you really quickly how you can actually get signed up to be notified of these videos as I switch to my desktop here. We'll open up Safari and show that window right there. So on the FileMaker Magazine website, which you're going to find right here at filemakermagazine.com, you are going to find, and I forgot to open up some of my highlight tools. Let me open up those really quickly. There we go. So this is the where you're going to want to click, and you can actually get notified of when I'm recording these videos. My intention is for about 2 weeks to do them at 11 o'clock every day. That's 11 o'clock my time, probably different time zone for you, or it may be the same time if you're in California or in Pacific Daylight Time. Otherwise, being notified, I may do other videos sporadically in this series once we've got enough content. So that's how you can actually be notified of these videos or the live postings. Now, the good thing about that, let's switch over here. The good thing about that is the fact that we can use chat, which we have right here. I'm going to bring that on screen. And we had a question that came in based on yesterday's video. And here's the question right here. Is there a way to have quick find turned off when adding a field to a layout versus the default of it being on? For example, you don't want to search through all the fields because that's it can be slow. We can take a quick look at that. I will bring this off screen and let me switch to my desktop here, make a new window. We are going to be looking at the invoices solution today, and we'll just use this as an example. So as I zoom in here, we can take a look at what FileMaker does by default. Yesterday in layout mode, we saw just a quick glimpse of using the inspector. I'm not going to jump too far ahead. We saw that we could turn this off in the 4th area. That was down here on this setting, include field for quick find. And as I stated, one of the things that FileMaker does by default is it tries to make things convenient for you by adding things to your system. You don't always want everything added to your system that FileMaker is going to add. Now, typically, and we haven't gotten to it yet, you would drag a new field into your FileMaker layout by simply selecting this tool, and you can either click the tool and then drag the field out, or you can click and drag the field out. Then it will allow you to specify the field. And as stated, that little icon right there, which we saw according to the view menu, show, and then that is going to be right there under quick find, or where is it? Hide condition placeholder. Yeah, quick find right there is what we're looking at. If you don't want this to be turned on for new fields, really the only way you can solve this problem is to select the field and then uncheck that option of include field for quick find. And then what I tend to do is I put this off to the non-visible portion. Now, we haven't learned about layouts and how the design surface works yet if you're a beginner, but we'll be getting into that really quickly. Over here, this is the non-visible portion of our layout. This is the visible portion of our layout, and of course the edge of our layout is defined right there. If you just put a field right here, and anytime that you need a new field, if you want a copy of that, you can always just copy and paste. I could use the copy and then paste of a field. My preferred method is to actually use a modifier key, which is the option key, and drag that. That will take a duplicate of that field. FileMaker will then prompt me to reassign this to whatever field I want. Key thing to note about this action is that If you do this with more than one field, FileMaker will not prompt you. So if I have two fields off to the side here and I select both of them, I selected the first with a click and then I held down the Shift key to select the second. If I hold an Option and drag in that scenario, FileMaker would seemingly be confused and wouldn't give me the prompt to reassign the field. Now we're going to look at all of the different ways that we're going to be able to interact with fields, but that's the easiest way to make a field, a new field. Just Option drag or copy and paste it and then allow FileMaker to prompt you to rename that field. And here's my final tip with regards to this question, which is a great question. If you already have a database and you would like to make selectively certain fields fall within the realm of quick find, here's a trick that you can do. FileMaker has this hidden feature that we can find when we select any given object on a layout. I'm going to select a field and I'm going to assume that you know that a field is pretty much a basic object. When I go up to the edit menu here and I zoom in, we can see that we've got this select all option. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Option key on the Macintosh. It may be Control or Shift on Windows. You'll have to play with it with regards to the key that you hit. But notice what happens when I do that. FileMaker actually gives me this little prompt to select same. It also changes the shortcut key there from Command A to selecting all, which would select everything on my layout, to the select same of Command Option A. And hopefully my face isn't blocking that out. Let me switch to just the desktop there so that we can see all of the screen. So if I do that with the option and do select all, what happens is FileMaker just selected all fields on this one layout. And then what that allows me to do is, taking a quick look over at my inspector, I can turn on or off the include field for quick find for all of those objects, which is really pretty handy. It's sort of like I can turn them all off with regards to quick find in one fell swoop. And then what I'm able to do is I'm able to then selectively choose those fields that I do want to include within quick find. So there you go. There's an answer to the question that Alex posted. This is one of the benefits of tuning in live and being able to answer your questions. In fact, if you have questions as I'm recording this, then please feel free to put them in the chat and I will get to them as best I can. Once I get overwhelmed with questions, I'll have to pick and choose. So today's lesson is all about manage database. I will not save my changes that I made there, and I'll hide this window. And you can follow along and start fresh if you would like to as well. You can go up to the Get Started. That will bring up our dialog. You can scroll down if you'd like. Find the Advanced Solutions. Now I'm working with a copy of FileMaker 16. If you're working with a copy previous to that, you may get this dialog right off the bat. If you're working with FileMaker 14 or earlier, then you may not get this dialog, but ultimately, we're working with the Invoices solution. It's a template file that FileMaker provides, and it'll give us a great start for working with FileMaker. Now I've already created one on my desktop. I'm going to open my recent and open Invoices, and we're going to take a look at the Manage area. Now, whether you've created a brand new file or you're working on something that is already existing, this one area is where you're going to be spending a lot of your time when you're working in FileMaker Pro. In particular, Define Database. Define Database is the granddaddy of all of the dialogues. I'd say that the number 2 that you'll probably be working with is the Layouts dialog. And you'll notice that I've reset my copy of FileMaker so that it's only showing the keys that by default FileMaker actually has. But we will be going through each of these different areas of FileMaker and talking about all of the nuances with regards to all of them, at least to the extent of my knowledge. So Define Database, saying that it's the granddaddy of all of the dialogues that you will be in and out of is probably an understatement, because I can't count the number of times while I'm developing how many times I go in and out of this dialog. Now, a lot of the dialogues in FileMaker are modal, meaning as I click, you can see that I cannot click and I cannot get outside of this dialog. It is locked into a mode, and we're going to go through all of the different aspects of this dialog. First off, we have up at the top here, from our left to right, table definitions, field definitions, and then relationship, or the relationship graph. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about briefly here today is context. Context in the world of FileMaker is extremely important for you to understand, but it's very abstract if you're a brand new user getting started with FileMaker. But hopefully once I explain it, you'll be able to get it and it will all make sense. Now, the most simple of all of this area is tables. Tables is simply where you're going to add a particular table that's going to store the fields that are going to be the data where users are going to input data. Now, this is really simple. Tables is directly analogous to a sheet within an Excel worksheet or a spreadsheet. So you can have multiple sheets. Those are the tabs typically down at the bottom in a conventional spreadsheet program. And then fields are simply just cells. If you're thinking about this from the standpoint of an Excel spreadsheet, fields are your cells. We will get into the point of where we see that fields have different types, but let's take a look at the tables dialog first and foremost. One key thing to make note of is that we've got details right here. It's always nice to pay attention that you can see the total number of fields and then also how many records. This record count is really helpful when you're either importing or exporting data and you want to know that if you're re-importing into a new version of a clone of a file, if you're doing a system where you develop the file offline and before you put it on FileMaker server, you're going to export the data that's on the server that's being used and then import it into your new copy of the file with all of the new changes. You can use this in order to double check that you've got a proper record count. Now, occurrences in the graph becomes very interesting, and we're going to talk about this in today's video briefly. We'll probably talk about it more as we go through this series. But one of the things we want to pay attention to is this area right here, this view by. When you are creating a file on your desktop or on your local computer, before it gets hosted up onto FileMaker server, there are certain settings that stick. This is one of those such settings. And we have the options when we look at, and this applies both to our tables and to our fields here, we can look at the order in which the tables were created. We can look at them by table name, which is one of the most convenient, that's alpha order, or we can look at them by custom order. Now, custom order allows you to use these little drag handles. And these drag handles you're going to see in many of FileMaker's dialogs. So if this is set to custom order, what it basically means is I would be able to put this in any custom order that I wanted to put this within. And the key thing to note about this setting is if I leave this as custom order currently, I close this file and then I upload it to FileMaker server. That means that every time that I go into the define database dialog here, the default will be custom order. Likewise, if I switch this to an alpha order or by table name, when I now close this file and upload it to FileMaker server, that's what will be the default. So from a convenience standpoint, if you start to name all of your tables and all of your fields according to a system that, let's say, it uses a alpha order by intention, and we can look at that, setting this setting before you upload the file is a key thing. Now, one of the things that we can do here in this dialog, if you need to share information, down at the bottom, we do have a print, which when you click print is going to bring up a dialog of all of the tables. It's going to have all of your data. If you need to share this data with someone, I find that it's convenient sometimes to use on the Macintosh Open PDF in Preview, or if you have a PDF style print driver installed on Windows, then you can of course make a PDF and send this to someone else. So that's a nice little tip right there. Now we can of course create, I don't need to say anything about that. That's pretty obvious. Change, you're just going to get a rename. Delete, we're going to talk about that briefly. And then we have copy and paste. Now, one of the things that is convenient about FileMaker with regards to copy and paste is you will find this in a lot of different areas of FileMaker. There's many things that you can copy and paste. Custom functions, scripts, script steps, tables, fields, they can all pretty much be copy and pasted. One thing you can't copy and paste will be relationship occurrences or table occurrences, as we'll discuss, and the relationships between them. So if I wanted another copy of this, notice there is no duplicate, but with a quick Command-C, Command-V, I now have a duplicate of this particular table. So if there's a table that has similar fields, which many times is the case. In fact, a good tip from a development standpoint is you can create a table by intention that is more or less a template table. Let's say it has the core fields that you tend to include in all of your other fields, and that would be a primary key, also known as an ID field. Maybe it's got a timestamp and who created that record. There is nothing in terms of cost with regards to having a table that is called simply template in your whole file and simply copying and pasting that as your starting point so that you don't have to go and copy and paste individual fields. Just a little bit of a time saver. Now the delete option in all of FileMaker, that's going to allow you to obviously delete this. When you delete a table, as we click delete, we're going to see that there is a dialog that comes up that says, do we want to permanently delete the one selected table and all their fields and record data, and this checkbox to also remove occurrences of this on the graph? Now we're going to talk about the graph and context, but this right here could be a pretty dangerous thing if you don't necessarily take into account what the ramifications might be. We'll talk about as we go throughout this series. One of the things that I do prior to deleting, I don't tend to delete, I tend to rename for a future delete, which allows me to actually double check that prior to delete, it is really what I want to delete. But we'll click cancel on this because there's one thing I want to show you. Once you become a more proficient FileMaker developer, there is an option in all of FileMaker, and this includes scripts, I believe value lists, fields, and tables here, that I can forcibly delete this without FileMaker asking me to do so. That again is holding down our great friend, the Option key. On Windows it may be Alt, it probably is Alt or Control. Sometimes they vary on Windows. If I hold down the Option key and click delete, that will forcibly get rid of this, or it should have in this particular case. Don't know why that didn't do that. It may not be on tables, it may just be on fields, and we'll have to see if that's actually the case. I have never actually forcibly deleted a field, to be honest. Yep, I don't think they may have changed that. So let's go ahead and delete that and take the graph. We'll switch to fields. Well, let's go over the one last area here. The import option is a pretty nice option when you are starting out with a database where the data exists somewhere else. Let's say, for example, in a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet. First off, I want you to be aware that one of the easiest ways to create a new table in FileMaker is to simply drag the table of data onto the FileMaker icon. You really don't have to go through an import process with FileMaker in order to create a brand new table. In fact, this is a really good thing to actually know about. I'm going to quickly discard this, and I'm going to, you'll have to bear with me here. I'm going to create a really quick, you'll have to ignore this, one, and then I'll just do comma delimited here, 2 and 3, if I could spell. And we're going to save this on the desktop as temp.txt. We'll just do that. We'll just save that. So all this is really is a plain text file. We're going to assume and imagine, since I don't have anything currently right here, that this came from an Excel spreadsheet and export. Over on my desktop, what I'm able to do with FileMaker, and one of the things that I like to do is I like to always put a shortcut. You can see that right here in my title bar of my Finder. I put a shortcut to FileMaker, and that's because I'm working with FileMaker so much. But as I mentioned, really, in order to create a new table from existing data in FileMaker, all you have to do is drag and drop. So I'm just going to drag this onto FileMaker, and you'll see that instantly FileMaker will come up with this dialog that says first row option. What is the first row? Is it field names or is it actual data? Now, if you select data, FileMaker is going to create the table with F1, F2, etc. If the first one is field names, then of course you get the field names automatically created for that table just by dragging it on. So in this case, I'm just going to say, okay, FileMaker is going to ask me where do I want to save this, and I will call it just a temp file, and I'll save it on my desktop. So this is a convenient way if you're dealing with existing data to get it into FileMaker quickly, because in this scenario what we have is my invoices file right here is the file that I'm working on, but somebody in management says we need this data integrated. Well, you just drag that onto FileMaker, have FileMaker create the table for you, especially if you take the time to put in field names. Then just go into that defined database. I did that with Command-Shift-D, and then from here you can copy this table with all of the fields created for you. Click OK in this defined database, go over to your main database, go into defined database, and then paste that table. And there you have it. That is one of the easiest ways to get data into FileMaker when the data already exists as a comma separated, a tab delimited, what have you. From there, you can start to massage and refine the solution. But likewise, this import button, it pretty much does the same thing. In order to create a table, you can import by simply clicking this button. I prefer the former method that I just showed you, just because it allows me to grab that file wherever it is and drag it on top of FileMaker. So let's take a quick hop over to, we've discussed everything in this dialog that I know about. Fields is pretty much going to be relatively the same as the tables layout. It's got the same copy and paste options. It's got a create, a change. It does have a duplicate here, so we don't have to use the copy and paste, so that's a little redundant. Duplicate does the exact same thing as copying and pasting, and with the delete, we should be able to do that forcible delete. Let's see if I can double check here. I'm going to select this field. I'm going to hold down the Option key and delete that, and you can see it wiped it out. So if you've got a field, you've opened up an invoices solution, I suggest doing the same thing. Try that. You click delete normally, and it will actually ask you if you want to delete this field. You can forcibly delete by holding down that option. Now again, as I stated, the view by, in this particular case, does apply to prior to the file being uploaded. If I wanted to see everything in field name order, then I would choose that. You also have field type. And for each of these selections that you can make here, I think it makes sense that if I'm looking at the column, I can actually just select the column, and that will actually change that menu that's over there. It changes it as I click it. So if I click field type, obviously this pop-up menu actually changes. Switching tables, here is a key thing to know about this dialog and the environment, since that's what we're talking about. You can take the time to switch here to go to invoices, or you can take the time to switch to go to customers. Likewise, in FileMaker, there are many ways to do things, so that's just one way. It's probably the most obvious of all of the ways, but likewise, if I don't want to take the time to switch here from orders, I can just switch to tables, and if this is already sorted by, let's say, alpha order by names, I can double click on invoices and it will take me to the fields tab. So if you don't like going up here and saying, I want to go to customers, if you like going to tables and then just double clicking products, it will take you into that field, or into those fields for that particular database. Now here is another item that we're going to take a look at. FileMaker is context sensitive with regards to wherever you are working in FileMaker. So I'm going to discard my changes here, and you can do the same. I am looking at the invoices layout, and this layout is tied to a particular table occurrence, which is tied to a particular table. And we're going to, it looks like I'm going to come up on my 30 minutes here really quickly. We'll probably get into context tomorrow. It's an important part of the graph, and I need to explain the graph quickly before we wrap up today's video. So what I want you to recognize is that here on this particular layout is tied to a table occurrence, which is tied to the table called company dashboard. Watch what happens when I go to the manage database, and the first thing that it opens up, it will open up to the table company dashboard. Now this context that I'm talking about knows where you are in FileMaker. If I switch to another layout, let's say to the customers layout, And if I open up the defined database at this standpoint, and I'm doing that with Command-Shift-D, notice that FileMaker has automatically dropped me into the context that I'm actually looking at. I'm looking at a layout tied to a table occurrence, which is tied to the customer's table. So this is a little trick that you can do with the defined database. You can have multiple windows open. As I open a new window, watch what happens when I simply just switch. I'm here looking at company dashboard, and I do a quick Command-Shift-D. I'm in the company dashboard fields. I exit out of this dialog with an escape key. I switch to this window, do Command-Shift-D, and I'm in the fields for customers. So that's a very big time saver when you're working with the Manage Database dialog with regards to FileMaker being aware of the context in which you are working in within your layouts. So let's take a look at the last thing that I'll probably be covering today, and it'll be the precursor to context, which we'll be taking a look at, I guess, tomorrow. And that is the third and final area of the define or the manage database. I keep calling this define database. That's because I'm an old-time FileMaker programmer, and it used to be called define database, and then FileMaker renamed everything to manage. But our third and final area is relationships. Now I'm going to assume that you have probably opened this dialog of Manage Database and taken a look at relationships. This is where all of the data is intertwined together. This is where you establish your structure. Now that may sound obvious, but this is probably one of the more confusing areas for most newer FileMaker developers. First off, because they have to learn relationship types, and we'll be taking a look at that, where I can see automatically this is a one-to-many, or in reverse, a many-to-one. And this is a many-to-many through a Cartesian join. This is an equijoin, and then we have non-equijoins, and we have greater thans and less thans. The relationship types, how these table occurrences are interconnected, and how your data is presented is the core of your FileMaker solution. And again, as I stated in the first video, there is no one way in order to do things. How you manage and structure your data really depends on how the data is going to be accessed and used. There are more efficient methods to store data, and there are less efficient methods to store data, and you can choose both of them. A reason to choose a less efficient way to store data is for speed. If speed matters and you have people that are connecting to the database over the wide area network, a la the internet, then that's a decision that you can certainly make. As long as the structure and the order make sense for the solution, then that's what's going to be best. Now, there are things you can do to make your database slower, and we'll be taking a look at those throughout this series. But for the most part, we want to make something that works for the situation that we're programming for. So the last thing that I'm going to leave you with today is, how do all of these three things interrelate? How do they connect? How is it that the tables and the fields connect to the relationships and connects to the layouts? This is what's known as context. And what we've done is we've taken a look at tables, we've taken a look at our fields, we've taken a look at the relationships. The last trick to this whole equation of context is our layout. Our layout, or our view, that's how we present the data that we're putting into the structure that we're building. And here's how it's going to relate. I'm going to hide FileMaker, and we are going to switch to a quick little application that I have, and we're going to take a look at these windows that I have on screen. Now you can see that in the background, we've got the two Manage Database windows, and then we have our main window of invoices. And here's one of the things that is, it's probably one of the most important things, and I'll go over it over and over again throughout this series. FileMaker is a context-based application. In other words, whatever the user is looking at, let's see if my pen tool actually works here. This is what the user is looking at right here. They are looking at a layout where you have designed and put all of the elements that the user interacts with. That's all of our buttons, our portals, which is a FileMaker specific object for showing related data, our fields, and all of the things that make everything look pretty. Well, this layout directly correlates to a table occurrence. That table occurrence is on the relationship graph right here within the relationships area. This relationship graph is merely a reflection of the underlying tables. This table occurrence of company dashboard is not this exact table as it is in the managed database. It is simply an alias, or I always think of them as little ghosts. So in other words, if I was to copy this particular table occurrence, and you can have as many of them as you want, then this table occurrence is still just a reflection of what the core table is underneath. So each one of these table occurrences in turn points to where the actual data is stored. And what context means is what can this particular table occurrence, or ghost as I think them, ghost of the real thing, what can it see? And that's all managed through the relationships. So for this copy of the company dashboard, I would ask the question, hey, company dashboard, which this specific layout is based off of, what can you see? And the response from this company dashboard would be, I can see content within the invoices table, I can see content within this table, and I can see content within this table. Now it's through the relationship which controls how the data is presented, or what data is returned in terms of what you get back. So for example, if this connection right here, this relationship, if it basically said you are only allowed to show information between the years of 2006 and 2007, that is all that this copy of company dashboard would actually be able to see. It would only be able to see the data through that fixed type of structure. But again, we get to dynamically control, by use of fields, what any one table occurrence can see based on how we wire things up and how we connect them. So my question to you as we wrap things up would be, if this was a copy of the company dashboard, what could it see? And hopefully your response to that is nothing. This particular table occurrence, if I was to make a new layout, let's say I have a new layout here and it's off to the side of this layout. This is our imaginary layout, and it is now tied to this table occurrence. It cannot see anything until I start to reconnect or wire up new relationships to that. We'll just make this one the most basic of all relationships, which we'll talk about as an equijoin. So from the standpoint of when I start to connect things to this table occurrence, it has a new and unique perspective of the data. So that's all you really need to think about with regards to the relationship graph. The relationship graph is using table occurrences. Think of them as aliases, shortcuts if you're on Windows, anything that points to something that is real, that allows you to establish the perspective of what that table occurrence can see. And then in turn, you can make a layout based on any of these table occurrences. So the perspective with regards to what data is shown is completely controlled by you. So that's our introduction to the manage area, the granddaddy of all of them, managed database. We, of course, have a lot to discuss with relationships and how we set those up. We will be going through in the next video, as I hide this. Let's see, I'm going to need to turn off that and see if I can hide that. There we go. And I will switch to our video where I've got, there we go. We'll bring that on screen, and I will bring the chat on screen as well so that we can get to any questions, and I can obviously switch back to those. If you have any questions, you can, of course, throw those out. I did get one question that says, Ahmed asks, what is the max tables and fields that they can hold? Good question, and there's an easy way to find that. Let me bring up let's switch right here to my desktop and bring Safari, because I want to give you the information that helps you out the most. Move that off screen. Like we learned in the first video, we are going to learn how we can search on, we can search for all of the limitations that FileMaker has. Like we learned, it was either yesterday or the day before, we're going to use a site qualifier, and we're going to search the FileMaker.com, and we're going to look for specifications is what we're going to look, and I believe that will give us the result that we're looking for. And there we've got FileMaker technical specifications. That may help us out, but we're actually looking for FileMaker's technical specifications. This one right here, if we click on it and bring that up, that'll probably give us the marketing information, telling us, what system FileMaker will work on, what the minimal operating system is. We're looking for the knowledge base, and anytime that we do a search, it's going to probably be prefixed with this help icon or this help domain. So if we click on this one, it's not FileMaker 16, but we would be able to get to it probably with FileMaker 16. And as that comes up, that's going to give us exactly what we want as an answer. It's going to tell us all of the different details of FileMaker. In fact, if you're ever going to want to become a FileMaker certified, then this is something that you do want to search and look into. You want to learn. There's only a few questions on the certification test that apply to this, but it's good to know where to find the information. You can see that FileMaker will tell us how many, the maximum length of a field name is 100 characters. A total of 256 million total fields over the lifetime of a file can be created. Highly unlikely that you'll max that out. Number of tables per file. You can have up to 1 million of those if you wanted to. Number of records. How about 64 quadrillion records? Now, one thing that we will get into that's an important point within FileMaker is that as a file ages, it is constantly moving these things inside the file called internal IDs forward. And one of the things that you can do is you can take advantage of those internal IDs and program against them. And if you're really interested in that, I'm going to point you to the FileMaker magazine website, where I've got tons of advanced articles talking about how you can use internal IDs for going to layouts, for navigating to found sets, records, using the get record ID, a lot of really cool things. But I think for today, that's probably going to give us a really good wrap. I'm either explaining the information really super well, or the questions just haven't started coming yet, which is fine. I do know that the video takes a little bit of time to catch up, so if you do have a question for today's episode or today's video, then please feel free to ask that in the chat right next to the video window. Otherwise, if you were watching this after the fact and you have a question, you can of course put that in the comments down below. I do get notified when those actually hit YouTube, and I will do my best to answer those. If there are things that you want to be covered, or you have a question about any of the previous videos, feel free to put those there, and I will discuss them as we're going through this series. So for tomorrow, we are going to be taking a look at some of our other dialog, or some of our other manage areas. We'll probably be going through manage layouts, because that's the next big dialog that we interact with regards to database. Then we'll be going through probably security, value lists, then scripts. We'll talk about the external data sources, containers, custom functions, custom menus, and themes. Most of these later menus in this particular menu of FileMaker, these are things that you tend to hit later in your career, where you're modifying FileMaker's actual menu system, you're adding custom functions, although it's a very key feature. Themes you will probably deal with, but you don't have to access this dialog too often. External data sources are when you get into a topic known as either the separation model or sharing data across files, and we'll of course get to that. The core of FileMaker can pretty much be wound up into these first 5 menus, and that's where you're going to be spending most of your time when you're working in FileMaker. So it looks like we didn't have any questions that came in, and I think that will probably bring this video to a wrap. As I always state in my videos online, I'd like to wish you much luck with your development, and until I see you next time, feel free to subscribe if you want. That's going to be either up here or up here somewhere else. And plus, if there's you're looking for the next video in this series, that'll probably show up as soon as I record it in the clickable link that you have right there. So until next time, as I already said, much luck and happy file making. Bye-bye.